The sun was setting over the small town of Riverdale as Lauren Thomas pulled her beat-up truck into the parking lot of Mac's Diner. After 15 years of military service, including 7 as a Navy SEAL, she had finally returned to her hometown. The transition to civilian life hadn't been easy. Her short brown hair and muscular build often drew curious stares, but she didn't mind. Life had toughened her in ways most people couldn't understand. Lauren was exhausted after a long day of unpacking boxes in her new apartment. All she wanted was a hot meal and some peace and quiet. The diner was busy that evening, filled with locals and travelers passing through. She slid into the only available booth and ordered a coffee while reviewing the menu. 3 tables away sat a group of 5 men in leather vests covered in patches. They were members of the Road Devils motorcycle club, known troublemakers in the area. Their loud voices and occasional bursts of laughter dominated the small diner, making other customers visibly uncomfortable. Lauren paid them no attention. Her years in the military had taught her to stay alert without appearing concerned. She ordered her food and scrolled through messages on her phone, catching up with former teammates scattered across the globe. "Hey, sweetheart," a deep voice interrupted her thoughts. "Mind if I join you?" Lauren looked up to see one of the bikers, a tall man with a thick beard and arms covered in tattoos, standing beside her table. His friends watched from across the room, smirking. "I'm fine on my own, thanks," she replied calmly, returning to her phone. The man didn't move. "Come on now, don't be like that. Pretty lady like you shouldn't eat alone." "I appreciate the offer, but I'd prefer to enjoy my meal in peace," Lauren said, her voice firm but polite. The biker's smile faded. He wasn't used to rejection, especially not in front of his friends. He leaned closer, placing both hands on the table. "Listen, I'm trying to be nice here. The least you could do is show some manners." The diner had grown quiet. The waitress behind the counter looked nervous, her hand hovering near the phone. Lauren took a deep breath, keeping her composure. "I've asked politely. Now I'm telling you, I'm not interested in company. Please go back to your table," she said, making direct eye contact with the man. Embarrassed and angry, the biker knocked Lauren's coffee cup off the table, spilling the hot liquid across the surface. "Stuck-up bitch," he muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. Lauren didn't flinch. She had faced much worse in war zones across the world. With deliberate movements, she grabbed some napkins and began cleaning up the spill. "Problem here?" The diner owner, an older man named Bill, approached cautiously. "No problem," Lauren replied calmly. "Just a little accident." The biker laughed and returned to his friends, who greeted him with high fives and chuckles. They grew even louder, clearly trying to intimidate the other customers. One elderly couple quickly paid their bill and left, looking frightened. Lauren's food arrived, and she ate quietly, seemingly unaffected by the incident. But she was watching everything, assessing the situation as she'd been trained to do. The bikers continued drinking and getting rowdier. She noticed the young waitress trying to avoid their table as they made crude comments whenever she passed. After finishing her meal, Lauren paid her bill and left a generous tip. She walked to her truck but didn't leave. Something didn't feel right about leaving the staff and other customers with these troublemakers. Instead, she sat in her vehicle and waited, watching the entrance of the diner. 30 minutes later, the bikers emerged, laughing and shoving each other. The waitress Lauren had noticed earlier followed them out, looking anxious as she headed toward an old Honda parked at the far end of the lot. 2 of the bikers noticed her and changed direction, following the young woman. Lauren stepped out of her truck and moved quietly through the shadows of the parking lot, keeping her distance but staying close enough to intervene if necessary. "Hey there, darling," one of the bikers called out. "How about you come hang with us for a while? We're having a little party back at our place." The waitress walked faster, fumbling with her keys. "No, thank you. I need to get home. The men quickened their pace, cutting her off before she could reach her car. One grabbed her arm. Don't be in such a rush. Night's just getting started. Let go of me, the waitress demanded, her voice shaking with fear. That was enough for Lauren. She stepped out of the shadows. The lady said she's not interested, Lauren called out, her voice steady and commanding. I suggest you respect her wishes and move along. The bikers turned, surprised to see the woman from the diner standing there. The three others, noticing the commotion, joined their friends. Well, look who it is, said the bearded man who had bothered her earlier. Coming back for another round? Lauren kept her expression neutral. I'm just making sure everyone gets home safely. The young lady clearly wants to leave, so let her go. The largest of the bikers stepped forward, towering over Lauren. This isn't your business, lady. Walk away while you still can. I'm making it my business, Lauren replied. She turned to the waitress. Get in your car and lock the doors. The waitress hesitated, clearly worried about leaving Lauren alone with the five men. It's okay, Lauren assured her. I'll be fine. The waitress broke free from the biker's loosened grip and rushed to her car, locking the doors as instructed. But instead of driving away, she pulled out her phone, presumably to call for help. Big mistake, the bearded biker growled, approaching Lauren. You should have minded your own business. Lauren stood her ground. I'm only going to say this once. Get on your bikes and leave. No one needs to get hurt tonight. The men laughed. 5 of us, 1 of you. Those odds don't look good for you, sweetheart. Lauren sighed. She had hoped to avoid confrontation, but these men weren't going to back down. Odds don't mean much if you don't know who you're dealing with. The first punch came from the bearded biker, a wide, telegraphed swing that Lauren easily dodged. Her response was lightning fast, a precise strike to his solar plexus that left him gasping for air. The others rushed her at once. Lauren moved with the fluid efficiency of someone who had spent years in combat training. She used their size and aggression against them, redirecting momentum and striking vulnerable points. One biker went down with a swept leg, another doubled over from a strike to the kidney. The largest biker managed to grab Lauren from behind, lifting her off the ground. She went limp for a second, then suddenly drove her head back into his nose. The crunch was audible, and he dropped her immediately, howling in pain and clutching his bleeding face. In less than a minute, 4 of the 5 bikers were on the ground, groaning or dazed. The 5th backed away slowly, hands raised. What the hell are you? He asked, eyes wide with shock. Lauren straightened her jacket. Someone who served her country. Now take your friends and go before the police arrive. As if on cue, sirens could be heard in the distance. The waitress had indeed called for help. The biker helped his friends to their motorcycles. As they started their engines, the bearded one glared at Lauren. This isn't over, he threatened. Lauren merely stared back, unimpressed. The bikers roared out of the parking lot just as the first police car turned in. Officer Roy Palmer was the first to approach. He had known Lauren since high school, though they hadn't spoken since before her military service. Lauren Thomas? Is that you? He asked, surprised. Lauren nodded. Hello, Roy. What happened here? He asked, looking around at the now empty parking lot. The waitress emerged from her car. Those bikers from the Road Devils were harassing me, and this woman stopped them. There were 5 of them, and she fought them off like it was nothing. Roy turned to Lauren with newfound respect. Is that true? Lauren shrugged. They made some poor choices. I convinced them to reconsider. She was amazing, the waitress continued, still in awe. The way she moved. I've never seen anything like it. I had good training, Lauren said simply. Roy smiled knowingly. Navy, right? Your mom mentioned you were home. She didn't mention what exactly you did in the service, though. Lauren didn't elaborate. Her work with the SEALs wasn't something she discussed casually. Just did my job like everyone else. The waitress, introduced as Jenny, insisted on giving her statement to the police. Lauren provided a brief account of what happened, downplaying her involvement. Those road devils have been causing trouble for months, Roy explained. We've been trying to build a case against them. This might help. They mentioned something about a party at their place, Lauren offered. Might be worth checking out. Roy nodded. We know where they hang out. I'll have some units swing by. He paused, studying Lauren. You know, the department is hiring. Someone with your skills could be valuable. Lauren smiled slightly. Thanks, but I'm still figuring out my next move. For now, I'm just trying to readjust to civilian life. Well, if you change your mind, let me know, Roy said, handing her his card. After the police finished taking statements, Jenny approached Lauren again. I don't know how to thank you, she said. I was so scared. No thanks necessary, Lauren replied. Just helping out. Are you worried they might come back? Jenny asked. They know you're in town now. Lauren shook her head. I'm not concerned. But you should be careful for a while, just in case. As Lauren finally drove home that night, she felt a strange sense of purpose she hadn't experienced since leaving the Navy. She had spent years protecting people in foreign countries, perhaps now she could do the same in her hometown. The road devils wouldn't forget what happened tonight. Lauren knew that men like that, with wounded pride and a reputation to maintain, rarely let things go. If they came looking for trouble again, they would find her ready. But next time, she wouldn't be alone. Word of the parking lot incident spread quickly through the small town. By the next morning, everyone seemed to know about the woman who had single-handedly fought off 5 bikers. Most versions of the story were wildly exaggerated, describing Lauren as everything from an ex-MMA fighter to a secret government agent. Lauren ignored the attention and focused on setting up her new life. She spent her days unpacking, fixing up her small house on the edge of town, and reconnecting with old friends. But at night, she found herself driving past Mac's Diner, keeping an eye out for the road devils, making sure they hadn't returned to cause more trouble. Part of her knew she should leave well enough alone. Her military service was over, she wasn't responsible for keeping the peace in Riverdale. But after years of purpose and structure, civilian life felt empty somehow. The confrontation with the bikers had awakened something in her, a reminder that her skills could still make a difference. And somewhere deep down, Lauren knew the road devils would be back. Men like that always came back. 3 days after the incident at Mac's Diner, Lauren was fixing the leaky roof of her front porch when a police cruiser pulled into her driveway. Officer Roy Palmer stepped out, removing his sunglasses as he approached. Nice place you've got here, he said, looking around at the small but sturdy house surrounded by pine trees. Need some work, though. Lauren climbed down from the ladder, wiping her hands on her jeans. It was my grandfather's. Been empty for years, but the bones are good. Roy nodded appreciatively. Your grandfather was a good man. He taught me how to fish when I was a kid. Lauren offered him a bottle of water from a cooler on the porch, and they sat on the weathered steps. She could tell this wasn't just a social call. What brings you out here, Roy? Thought you should know we raided the Road Devils clubhouse last night, he said, taking a sip of water. Found quite the operation: drugs, stolen merchandise, illegal weapons. Good, Lauren replied. They won't be bothering anyone for a while then. Roy looked uncomfortable. That's the thing. We only caught 3 of them. The other 2 weren't there, including Mike Blackwell, the one with the beard who gave you trouble. Lauren absorbed this information silently. She had expected as much. There's something else, Roy continued. These guys have connections to a larger motorcycle gang based in Carson City. They're not the kind of people who forget a grudge. Are you here to officially warn me? Lauren asked. Roy sighed. Partly. But also to ask if you'd reconsider my offer. We could use someone with your background on the force, especially now. Lauren stood up, stretching her back. I appreciate the concern, Roy, but I'll be fine. As for the job offer, let me think about it. After Roy left, Lauren went inside and opened a locked trunk she'd brought from her military days. Inside was her service weapon, properly registered for civilian ownership, and various tactical gear. She hadn't planned on needing any of it in Riverdale, but plans changed. That evening, Lauren drove to Mac's Diner for dinner. The place was busier than her first visit, and she noticed several people glancing her way as she entered. Bill, the owner, greeted her warmly and insisted her meal was on the house. No need for that, Lauren protested. Please, Bill said quietly. What you did for Jenny, those road devils have been terrorizing this town for months. Nobody stood up to them before. Lauren reluctantly accepted and took a seat at the counter. Jenny was working again and gave her a bright smile and a thumbs up from across the room. As she ate, Lauren overheard conversations from nearby tables. People were discussing the police raid on the Road Devils clubhouse, speculating about the 2 members who escaped arrest. I heard they went back to Carson City, one man said. Nah, Mike wouldn't run, another replied. He's got too much pride. He'll want payback for what happened. Lauren finished her meal quickly and left. She drove around town for almost an hour, familiarizing herself with every street and alley, noting potential danger zones and safe spaces, a habit from her military days that had saved her life more than once. The next morning, Lauren received a text message from an unknown number. Coffee? Need to talk. Jenny. They arranged to meet at a small cafe on the other side of town, away from Mac's Diner. Jenny looked nervous when Lauren arrived. Sorry to bother you, she said as they sat at a corner table. But I saw something last night that worried me. Lauren listened as Jenny explained that after her shift ended, she spotted Mike Blackwell's distinctive motorcycle parked outside a bar on the edge of town. He wasn't alone. There were other bikes I didn't recognize, not local guys. Did he see you? Lauren asked. Jenny shook her head. I don't think so. I drove past quickly when I realized who it was. Lauren thanked Jenny for the information and advised her to be careful, to vary her routes home, and to call the police at the first sign of trouble. After leaving the cafe, Lauren drove to the bar Jenny had mentioned. It was closed at this hour, but she noted the layout of the building and surrounding area. As she was about to leave, she noticed a man watching her from across the street. When their eyes met, he quickly turned and walked away. That night, Lauren couldn't sleep. Years of military operations had honed her instincts, and everything about the situation felt like the calm before a storm. She checked her home security, making sure all windows and doors were secure, and kept her phone and weapon close at hand. Just after 2 a.m., Lauren's security system alerted her to movement in the front yard. Through the window, she could make out several figures moving stealthily toward her house. She quickly sent a text message to Roy with one word, company. Lauren moved silently through her dark house, positioning herself strategically. When the first window shattered, she was ready. A smoke grenade was thrown inside, but Lauren was already wearing a mask she'd retrieved from her military gear. She's got to be choking by now, a voice said outside. Let's get this over with. 2 men entered through the broken window, while another tried the back door. Lauren waited until the intruders were fully inside before making her move. Using the smoke as cover, she incapacitated the first man with a swift strike to the knee and throat, dropping him silently. The second intruder, hearing his companion fall, fired blindly into the smoke. Lauren had already moved, circling behind him. A quick blow to the base of his skull rendered him unconscious. The third man, hearing gunshots, became more cautious. "Mike? Jerry? What's happening in there?" he called from the back door. Lauren didn't respond, using the moment to secure the two unconscious intruders with zip ties. She then positioned herself near the back entrance, waiting. When the third man finally entered, Lauren was surprised to see it wasn't Mike Blackwell but someone she didn't recognize. He was larger than the others, with a military-style haircut that suggested he might have some training of his own. "Whoever you are," Lauren called out, "you're trespassing. The police are on their way." The man laughed. "Police in this town take at least 15 minutes to respond. We'll be long gone by then." "We?" Lauren questioned. "Your friends are already down. It's just you now." The man hesitated, clearly not believing her. Lauren used his moment of uncertainty to make her move, but this opponent was quicker than the others. He blocked her initial strike and countered with surprising skill. For the first time, Lauren found herself in a genuine fight. The man had combat training, though not at her level. They exchanged blows in the smoke-filled room, each assessing the other's abilities. "You're good," the man grunted after Lauren landed a solid hit to his ribs. "Military?" "Navy," Lauren replied, circling him carefully. "You?" "Army. 2 tours in Afghanistan," he said, wiping blood from his lip. "Nothing compared to a SEAL though, right?" So they knew who she was. That explained the smoke grenades and coordinated attack. "Not too late to walk away," Lauren offered, genuinely not wanting to seriously hurt a fellow veteran. The man laughed. "Can't do that. Mike's paying too well." "Speaking of Mike," Lauren said, "where is he? Sending others to do his dirty work?" The question seemed to distract the man just enough. Lauren seized the opportunity, feinting left before delivering a powerful combination that finally put him down. As she secured the third intruder, Lauren heard sirens in the distance. Roy had received her message. The police arrived to find Lauren calmly sitting on her porch steps, the smoke clearing from her partially damaged house. The 3 intruders were secured inside, all alive but in varying states of discomfort. Roy shook his head as officers led the men to police cruisers. "You okay?" he asked Lauren. She nodded. "They weren't expecting me to be ready for them." "The guy with the crew cut is Jake Wilson," Roy said. "Ex-military, works as muscle for hire. The other 2 are road devils from Carson City." He paused. "Still no sign of Mike Blackwell though." Lauren wasn't surprised. Men like Blackwell typically sent others to do their dangerous work. "You can't stay here tonight," Roy said, looking at her damaged windows and smoke-stained walls. "We can put you up in a hotel." "I've slept in worse conditions," Lauren replied, but eventually agreed to stay with a friend until she could repair her house. As she packed a small bag, Lauren knew this wasn't over. Mike Blackwell was still out there, and he had escalated from bar harassment to home invasion in less than a week. Whatever his connection to the larger motorcycle gang was, it clearly provided him with resources and people willing to do his bidding. For the first time since returning to civilian life, Lauren found herself in a tactical situation with no clear mission parameters or chain of command. She had spent years working with a team, but now she was alone. Or was she? As Lauren drove away from her damaged home, she realized that in the short time since her return to Riverdale, she had already connected with people like Jenny, Roy, and Bill. Unlike the anonymous war zones where she'd operated, this was her hometown. These were her people. The road devils had picked the wrong woman to harass, but they had also picked the wrong town. Lauren Thomas wasn't just a former Navy SEAL, she was a daughter of Riverdale. And she protected what was hers. For the next week, Lauren stayed with her old high school friend Diane, who ran the local hardware store. News of the home invasion spread quickly through Riverdale, adding new layers to the growing legend of the Navy SEAL woman who stood up to the road devils. Lauren kept a low profile, spending her days helping Diane at the store and her evenings repairing her damaged house. The three intruders remained in custody, refusing to give up much information about Mike Blackwell's whereabouts or plans. "They're afraid of something worse than jail," Roy told Lauren when he stopped by the hardware store to check on her. The Carson City chapter of the Road Devils has a reputation that makes hardened criminals nervous. "What about this Jake Wilson, the ex-Army guy?" Lauren asked. "He doesn't seem like a typical biker." Roy shook his head. "He's not talking either. But we found something interesting in his phone records. Multiple calls to a burner phone registered to a trucking company owned by a businessman named Victor Crane." The name meant nothing to Lauren, but she could tell from Roy's expression that it was significant. "Crane moved to Carson City about 5 years ago," Roy explained. "Since then, drug trafficking in the region has tripled. We've never been able to pin anything on him directly, but every investigation leads back to his businesses somehow. And now he's connected to the Road Devils," Lauren said thoughtfully. "It looks that way. The question is, why would someone like Crane care about a small-town dispute between bikers and a diner customer?" Lauren had been wondering the same thing. The escalation seemed disproportionate to the original incident. A few humiliated bikers shouldn't have warranted a military-style home invasion. That evening, as Lauren was fixing her front window, Jenny stopped by unexpectedly. "I heard you were staying with Diane, but the lady at the grocery store said you come here every night to work on the house," Jenny explained, looking around nervously as if expecting to be observed. "Something wrong?" Lauren asked, putting down her tools. Jenny hesitated. "Maybe nothing. But..." She pulled out her phone and showed Lauren a photo she'd taken outside Mac's diner. It showed Mike Blackwell sitting in a parked car across the street, watching the building. "He's been there 3 days in a row during my shift. Just sitting there, watching." Lauren studied the image closely. "Have you told Roy?" "Yes, but by the time police arrive, he's always gone. They can't do anything if they can't catch him in the act." Lauren thought for a moment. "Does your shift end at the same time every day?" Jenny nodded. 8 o'clock. "And you're scheduled tomorrow?" "Yes." Lauren made a decision. "I'll be there. But I need you to do exactly what I say." The next evening, Lauren arrived at Mac's diner 30 minutes before Jenny's shift ended. She wore civilian clothing but had positioned herself strategically with a clear view of both the diner entrance and the street where Blackwell had been observed. Sure enough, his car appeared right on schedule, parking in the same spot as in Jenny's photo. Lauren texted Jenny, "He's here. When your shift ends, walk to your car like normal but don't leave right away. Sit inside with doors locked for 2 minutes." At exactly 8 p.m., Jenny emerged from the diner and walked to her car. Lauren watched as Blackwell straightened in his seat, his attention fixed on the waitress. When Jenny got into her car but didn't immediately drive away, Blackwell seemed to grow impatient. After a minute, he started his engine. Lauren had already positioned herself behind his car, approaching from his blind spot. When Blackwell put his vehicle in reverse, Lauren made her move, appearing suddenly at his driver's side window. "Looking for someone?" she asked calmly. Blackwell's face registered shock, then anger. He reached for something under his seat, but Lauren was faster. She grabbed his wrist through the open window, applying precise pressure that made him gasp in pain. "Bad idea," she said firmly. "Let's talk instead." "I have nothing to say to you," Blackwell snarled. "Then you can explain to the police why you're stalking a young woman," Lauren replied, nodding toward the approaching police cruiser. She had arranged for Roy to park nearby and respond to her signal. Blackwell's expression darkened. This is bigger than you understand. You should have stayed out of it. Then help me understand, Lauren said. Why send 3 men to my house? Why stalk Jenny? This isn't about what happened in the parking lot, is it? Before Blackwell could answer, Roy's cruiser pulled up behind them. Lauren released Blackwell's wrist and stepped back, allowing Roy to approach. Mike Blackwell, Roy said, recognizing the biker immediately. Step out of the vehicle, please. For a moment, it seemed Blackwell might resist, but then he complied, allowing himself to be handcuffed and placed in the police cruiser. As Roy led him away, he looked back at Lauren with an expression that wasn't entirely hateful. There was something like respect mixed with the anger. You're making powerful enemies, Blackwell said. Crane doesn't forget, and he doesn't forgive. It was the confirmation Lauren needed. Victor Crane was indeed connected to this situation, though she still didn't understand why. After giving her statement to the police, Lauren walked over to check on Jenny, who was still waiting in her car as instructed. Is it over? Jenny asked hopefully as Lauren approached. For tonight, Lauren replied. But I need to understand why they're so interested in you. This feels personal, beyond typical biker intimidation. Jenny's face paled. I didn't think it was related, but, about 6 months ago, I was working late at the diner. A group of businessmen came in for a meeting in the private back room. I wasn't supposed to overhear, but when I brought coffee, they were discussing shipping routes and product distribution. Drug trafficking, Lauren guessed. Jenny nodded. One man seemed in charge. Well-dressed, older. The others called him Mr. Crane. And there it was, the missing piece. Jenny had accidentally witnessed a drug trafficking meeting involving Victor Crane. The road devils weren't just random troublemakers, they were enforcers for Crane's operation. Did they know you overheard? Lauren asked. I didn't think so. I pretended not to notice and left quickly. But one of the road devils was there too, sitting at the counter while his boss had the meeting. Maybe he saw something in my face. Lauren considered this new information carefully. What had started as a simple confrontation in a diner parking lot had revealed connections to a major criminal enterprise. Jenny wasn't just being harassed, she was a potential witness who could connect Crane to drug trafficking activities. We need to tell Roy everything, Lauren said. Tonight. As they drove to the police station, Lauren realized she had inadvertently stumbled into a much larger and more dangerous situation than she had imagined. Her military training had prepared her for combat, but not for the complex web of small-town politics and organized crime. For the first time since returning to Riverdale, Lauren felt the familiar clarity of purpose that had defined her years as a SEAL. Jenny needed protection. Riverdale needed cleaning up. And Victor Crane needed to learn that even small towns had defenders willing to stand against criminals who thought themselves untouchable. The real battle was just beginning. The Riverdale police station buzzed with unusual activity as officers processed Mike Blackwell and prepared to document Jenny's statement about the drug trafficking meeting she had witnessed. Chief Wilson, a stern woman in her 50s who had run the department for over a decade, listened intently as Roy explained the situation. So you're telling me Victor Crane, who we've been trying to build a case against for years, held a drug trafficking meeting in the back room of Mac's Diner? Chief Wilson asked skeptically. That's what Ms. Thomas and Ms. Cooper are saying, Roy confirmed, nodding toward Lauren and Jenny who sat in the adjacent interview room. Chief Wilson sighed. Crane is careful. Too careful for this kind of mistake. Maybe he thought a small-town diner was safer than his usual spots, Roy suggested. Less chance of being monitored by state police or DEA. Or maybe he wanted to establish connections in Riverdale, Lauren added, having overheard their conversation. Expanding his territory. Chief Wilson studied Lauren with interest. Ms. Thomas, I understand you've had quite an impact since returning to town. Roy tells me you were a Navy SEAL? Lauren nodded but offered no elaboration. Her service wasn't something she discussed casually. We could use your statement on record as well, Chief Wilson said, gesturing for Lauren to join them. For the next 2 hours, Jenny and Lauren provided detailed accounts of everything that had happened, from the initial confrontation at the diner to Blackwell's recent stalking behavior. Jenny's description of the meeting she had witnessed months ago was particularly valuable, as she recalled specific names and locations mentioned during the drug trafficking discussion. This is enough to justify a formal investigation, Chief Wilson concluded. But not enough for an arrest warrant for Crane himself. We need more evidence linking him directly to these operations. What about Jenny's safety in the meantime? Lauren asked. Blackwell is in custody, but Crane has other people working for him. Chief Wilson nodded grimly. We can provide limited protection, but our resources are stretched thin. The county sheriff might be able to help. Lauren wasn't satisfied with this response. She had seen firsthand how quickly violence could escalate when criminal organizations felt threatened. I have an idea, she said after a moment of consideration. But I'll need your cooperation, Chief. By midnight, the plan was in place. Jenny would temporarily relocate to her sister's home in the next county, accompanied by a police escort. Publicly, however, it would appear that she was continuing her normal routine, staying at her apartment and working her shifts at the diner. You want to use yourself as bait, Roy said to Lauren as they left the station. That's what this plan boils down to. Lauren didn't deny it. Crane will send someone else when Blackwell doesn't report back. When they come looking for Jenny, they'll find me instead. This isn't a war zone, Lauren, Roy protested. You can't just. It became a war zone when they attacked my home, Lauren interrupted. And it's not just about me anymore. This town has a drug trafficking problem that's about to get worse unless we stop it now. Roy couldn't argue with her logic, but his concern was evident. At least let me assign an officer to watch your back. Lauren shook her head. Too obvious. I need them to think I'm vulnerable. She paused. But I could use some unofficial support from someone I trust. The next morning, Lauren moved into Jenny's small apartment above the bookstore on Main Street. The owner, an elderly woman named Mrs. Winters, was a friend of Chief Wilson and had agreed to the arrangement without asking too many questions. Lauren spent the day making herself visible around town, shopping at the grocery store, having lunch at Mac's Diner, and walking back to Jenny's apartment in the evening, establishing a pattern that would be easy to track. On the third day, she noticed the surveillance. A dark blue sedan with tinted windows parked across from the bookstore, occupied by 2 men who made minimal effort to conceal their observation. Lauren texted Roy, company. Blue sedan, 2 men. License plate XTR 547. Roy's response came quickly, registered to Carson City Luxury Car Rentals. Known front for Crane's organization. That night, Lauren prepared. She secured the apartment, establishing defensive positions and escape routes, habits ingrained from years of military operations. Unlike her home invasion, this time she would control the environment and the timing. Around midnight, Lauren heard the subtle sounds of someone attempting to disable the apartment's alarm system. She moved silently to her predetermined position, using the darkness to her advantage. The intruder was skilled, bypassing the alarm without triggering it and picking the lock with practiced efficiency. Based on the precision of his movements, Lauren suspected another professional, possibly with military or law enforcement background. When the door finally opened, a tall man entered cautiously, scanning the room with a flashlight attached to his handgun. He moved with the confidence of someone who had done this many times before. Lauren allowed him to clear the main room before making her presence known. "Looking for Jenny?" she asked from the shadows. The man spun around, weapon raised. "Who's there?" "The same person who put Jake Wilson and his friends in jail," Lauren replied calmly. The same person who helped arrest Mike Blackwell. Recognition flashed across the intruder's face. The SEAL woman. Crane said you might be a problem. I'm more than a problem, Lauren said. I'm the solution to Crane's unwanted presence in my town. The man laughed. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Crane has judges and politicians in his pocket. He has operations in 3 states. You're just one woman. One woman was enough to get this far, Lauren pointed out. And I'm not alone anymore. As if on cue, police sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder by the second. The intruder's expression hardened as he realized he'd been set up. This isn't over, he warned, backing toward the door. Crane wants the waitress silenced, and he always gets what he wants. Not this time, Lauren replied. The man made a break for the exit, but found his escape route blocked by Roy and 2 other officers coming up the stairs. After a brief struggle, he was subdued and handcuffed. As the police led him away, Roy approached Lauren. That's twice now you've helped us catch Crane's men. He's not going to be happy. Lauren nodded grimly. I'm counting on it. The more people he sends, the more evidence we collect. Eventually, he'll have to come himself. That's what worries me, Roy admitted. When cornered, men like Crane don't surrender, they escalate. Lauren knew he was right. The real danger was just beginning, but for the first time, she felt like she had found her purpose in civilian life. Protecting her hometown from predators like Crane wasn't so different from her missions overseas. The battlefield had changed, but the principles remained the same. Let him come, she said quietly. I'll be ready. News of the second failed attempt against Lauren spread quickly through Riverdale. What had begun as a local story about a woman standing up to troublemaking bikers had evolved into something far more significant. Residents began sharing information about suspicious activities they had previously been too afraid to report. Tips flooded into the police station about unusual late-night deliveries at abandoned properties and unfamiliar vehicles making regular stops at remote locations. It's like the whole town suddenly woke up, Roy told Lauren as they reviewed the growing evidence board at the police station. Photos of known associates of the Road Devils and Crane's organization covered one wall, with red string connecting individuals to locations and events. People needed to see that standing up to these criminals was possible, Lauren replied. Fear is the weapon Crane has been using all along. Chief Wilson entered the room, her expression more serious than usual. Just got word from the state police. They've agreed to send a special investigative unit to help build the case against Crane. They'll be here tomorrow. That's good news, Lauren said, though she noticed the concern in the chief's voice. Isn't it? Chief Wilson hesitated. Mostly. But I've worked with these state units before. They tend to come in and take over, pushing local law enforcement aside. All our work could be sidelined. Or worse, Roy added. We don't know how far Crane's influence reaches. If he has connections in the state police. The implication hung heavily in the air. Corruption could extend beyond Riverdale, potentially compromising their investigation. We need to move quickly then, Lauren decided. Before the state police arrive. What's our strongest lead right now? Roy pointed to a location on their map marked with a question mark. Multiple reports of unusual activity at the old lumber mill outside town. It's been closed for years, but locals have noticed lights and vehicles there at night. Perfect place for a distribution center, Chief Wilson noted. Remote, multiple access roads, large storage capacity. Lauren studied the satellite image of the property. We should do recon tonight. Confirm if it's being used before we bring in more people. Chief Wilson nodded reluctantly. Normally I'd say wait for backup, but under the circumstances. Roy, you and Lauren check it out. Surveillance only. Do not engage. I mean it. As darkness fell, Lauren and Roy parked their unmarked vehicle on a Forest Service road half a mile from the abandoned lumber mill. Lauren had changed into dark tactical clothing from her SEAL days, while Roy wore his standard-issue police gear without any identifying badges. "Just like old times," Lauren murmured as they approached the perimeter on foot. "You did a lot of sneaking around lumber mills as a SEAL?" Roy asked with a hint of humor. Lauren smiled slightly. "The terrain changes, but the principles don't. Move slowly, stick to shadows, control your breathing." They reached the edge of the tree line overlooking the mill. The main building was dark, but a smaller warehouse toward the back showed signs of activity. 2 SUVs were parked outside, and light filtered through the windows. "I count 4 men outside," Lauren whispered, observing through night vision binoculars. "Armed guards patrolling the perimeter in pairs. Professional setup." "Definitely not just kids hanging out," Roy agreed. "We should." He was interrupted by the sound of approaching vehicles. From their hidden position, they watched as 3 more SUVs and a large truck drove up to the warehouse. Men emerged from the vehicles, including one who immediately stood out from the others. "That's him," Roy whispered urgently. "Victor Crane." Lauren studied the man through her binoculars. In his 60s, with silver hair and an expensive suit, Crane looked more like a successful businessman than a drug trafficker. He moved with the confident authority of someone accustomed to command. "He doesn't usually show up in person," Roy continued. "Something big must be happening." Lauren nodded. "Let's get closer. I want to hear what they're saying." Despite Roy's reluctance, they carefully made their way to the warehouse, using stacked lumber and old equipment as cover. They managed to position themselves beneath a partially open window, close enough to overhear the conversation inside. "Shipment leaves tomorrow night," Crane was saying. "Everything needs to be packaged and ready by noon. Once the state police arrive, movement will be restricted." "What about the SEAL woman?" someone asked. "She's becoming a problem." There was a pause before Crane responded. "I've arranged a more permanent solution. By this time tomorrow, Lauren Thomas will no longer be our concern." Roy and Lauren exchanged alarmed glances. The threat was clear. "We've seen enough," Roy whispered. "Let's get back and report." As they began their careful retreat, Lauren spotted a guard approaching their position. She signaled Roy to freeze as the man passed within feet of their hiding spot. Once he moved on, they continued their withdrawal, making it back to the tree line without incident. They were halfway to their vehicle when Lauren suddenly stopped, raising her hand for silence. In the distance, she could hear the unmistakable sound of vehicles moving rapidly through the forest. "They know we're here," she said quietly. "Run." They sprinted through the darkness as the sounds of pursuit grew louder. Lauren's years of training allowed her to navigate the uneven terrain efficiently, but Roy struggled to keep pace. "There's a ravine ahead," Roy gasped. "If we can reach it, there's a culvert that leads to the main road." They pushed forward, the beams of flashlights now visible through the trees behind them. As they neared the ravine, a shot rang out, the bullet splintering bark from a tree near Lauren's head. "Go!" Lauren urged, pushing Roy ahead as she turned to face their pursuers. She had no weapon besides a tactical knife, but she didn't need one. As the first man emerged from the trees, Lauren moved with practiced precision, disarming him before he could fire again and using his momentum to throw him to the ground. 2 more men appeared, but Lauren had the advantage of darkness and superior training. She engaged them briefly, creating enough chaos and confusion to buy time before disengaging and following Roy down the ravine. They reached the culvert, a concrete drainage pipe large enough to crawl through. Roy went first, with Lauren close behind. They emerged near the main road just as police sirens became audible in the distance. "Chief must have sent backup when we didn't check in," Roy said, catching his breath. Lauren nodded, but her mind was already processing what they had learned. Crane's operation was larger than anticipated, with a major shipment planned for the following night. More concerning was the direct threat against her life, a permanent solution that was already in motion. As police cruisers approached their position, Lauren made a decision. The rules of engagement had changed. Crane had escalated from intimidation to attempted murder. It was time to respond accordingly. "We need to move fast," she told Roy as they flagged down the approaching officers. "Before Crane disappears, and before whatever he's planned for me happens." The battle lines were drawn. Tomorrow would bring either victory or defeat, with no middle ground remaining. Back at the Riverdale police station, tension filled the air as Lauren and Roy briefed Chief Wilson on what they had discovered at the lumber mill. "We have enough for a warrant now," Chief Wilson said, already reaching for her phone. "I'll wake up Judge Harmon."